On today's weekly recap, we discuss the Cleveland Cavaliers' ongoing hunt for a new head coach, Kobe Altman's reported willingness to keep the core four together, and how much influence does Donovan Mitchell have over the team's decision-making this summer. And before we start, if you enjoy the Junkyard Pod, please consider hitting subscribe and dropping a like. It goes a long way towards supporting the channel, and we truly appreciate it. Now let's get into this.
This is the moment we've all been waiting for the thousands in attendance and the millions watching around the world. Let's get ready to
Welcome to the Junkyard Pod, hosted by Tony Pesta, Jackson Flickinger, and Corey Walsh. Today we have another weekly recap for you guys, but first, let me ask my co-host how their week has been going. Jackson, I know there was some Star Wars content coming out that you got to check out. Have you been enjoying it? How was your week, man?
The Acolyte is great. Everybody needs to go watch it, or at least someone needs to go watch it so we can talk about it, because these two idiots won't watch it. So please, people in the comments, talk to me about The Acolyte. Unless you're one of those people who are like, oh, Star Wars is too woke, then just, don't even comment. Like, please.
Well, if I was on George Lucas's Rolodex for personal invites, maybe I would have watched it with a sneak peek screening like Jackson did. But no, I'll be watching it like a common person on Disney Plus at a to be determined time. You know, Jackson, that I only watch the spinoffs. I refuse to watch the main source.
Corey's the weirdest person alive. Please name the Star Wars content that you've seen.
Well, let's see. I watched, obviously, Mandalorian, because, who in their mother hasn't watched it?
Tony.
Pedro Pascal, Grogu, Tony's.
I'm a big fan of Baby Yoda and Pedro Pascal, but I have not seen The Mandalorian.
Separately,
I have
just
seen
not
The Phantom
collectively.
Menace, so I've seen more of the main stories than Corey, but he's got me beat there. So
I also watched Boba Fett on Disney Plus. That was terrible. I watched the half of the Obi-Wan show before I just forgot about it. And I watched about 17 episodes of the Clone Wars.
17?
I was like, this is a lot to follow, because I went through the order that they say you should go through, not like the season episode by episode, because they say it's not linear if you watch it.
Like, this is just the weirdest thing I've ever heard in my life.
I'm glad we could start
ridiculous
the episode
behavior.
by ticking Jackson off by hitting close to home.
He's acting like I said everything Star Wars came out with is terrible.
No, it's just weird behavior. Like,
I stray from the norm. I mean, come on.
You do, yeah.
You should respect it.
Because when this was first brought up, it was like, yeah, I've seen The Mandalorian. And it's like, oh, yeah, like, that's popular. People like that. Baby Yoda's everywhere. Like, that kind of makes sense. And it's like, and I've seen some Kenobi. I was like, oh, yeah, I mean, I love Kenobi. But, like, it'll kind of only make sense if you've seen the movies. And then you throw in, like, this whole Clone Wars thing. And it's like, that's where you lose me.
It's like when I went to go see Avengers Endgame without seeing any of the prior Marvel movies.
No,
and there's like things where people are like, oh my God, like, oh, that's a deep cut or something. And I'm like, why is everyone standing up when he grabs the hammer? Like, why is that a big deal?
It's you just have tears in your eyes?
I did.
When he said Avengers Assemble, I'm like, I've heard that before.
Said, yeah, that's why we're here. We're watching that movie.
They're assembling.
I'm glad you guys are both having strong starts to your week. That wasn't much of a recap, more of a rambling. But I'm going to try and bring it back together here with my transition, because I started reading.
Tony, how was your week?
Book right here. It's been going good. I've been outside and I started reading Dune. And you know what? The Cavs, they may be looking for their Lisan Al-Gaib as well. Because, a.k.a. their voice from the outer world, since Jackson has not seen Dune 2.
I've seen Dune.
He hasn't seen the second one yet, which...
How dare you?
Shame on you. But
it's 4 hours of beauty.
It really is. And hopefully that transition hits, because the Cavs have been searching for a new head coach. Of course, last month, they decided to part ways with JB Bickerstaff, and we all agreed on our episode back then that I think it was a successful coaching stint for JB, all things considered. It was just time for both sides to move on. So here we are. The Cavs are speed dating 10 different coaches, it sounds like. They've lined up a handful of interviews with guys such as Johnny Bryant, Chris Quinn, David Adelman was announced today, James Borrego, Kenny Atkinson, and Micah Norrie, who all could bring something fresh to the Cavaliers. Jackson, I want to start with you because I know you have strong feelings about this. We discussed this a little bit in that previous episode. Do you have a favorite of this bunch? Was there perhaps an entire manifesto written on one of these candidates?
Yes, James Borrego, he's the guy. Anybody else, I'm going to be disappointed. I think James Borrego is exactly what this team needs. He is somebody who got the most out of, like, the most offensive ability out of the least offensive talent that I've kind of, that we've seen in recent history. And, like, he's somebody who Kemba Walker's best year happened when he was the 1 year James Borrego was the coach. Lonzo Ball looked like he was going to become the next face of the league after his first 2 years where James Borrego was his coach. Thank you. Thank you. LaMelo Ball looked like that. Devontae Graham looked like he was a solid starting NBA player. And he made that backcourt work with Terry Rozier in the sense that, like, Devontae Graham and Terry Rozier were working together in tandem, not just kind of like doing their own thing. And it produced a passable offense, which is just insane. And going back and reading some of the things about, I talked in my article for Fear the Sword, which Tony mentioned, thank you. I talked about kind of like the X's and O's things that he does well to kind of free up his best players. But one of the things that's kind of interesting is looking back and reading what Charlotte fans and analysts thought about the firing at the time. And a lot of them were like, well, he's not getting the most out of this group. He's not playing the young guys like JT Thor enough. He's not doing, like he can't, like this is a really promising group. He just can't get them over the hump. And it's like, in hindsight, that looks incredibly stupid because it's like, yeah, of course he wasn't playing these young guys. These young guys aren't very good. Like, I don't know why you thought that this core was like some, the next Golden State Warriors or something like that. That's, destined for playoff greatness. Like, this is a pretty mediocre group where there's really only one good player in LaMelo Ball. And it's just, it kind of just all makes, like, it just makes too much sense. This team needs an offensive, like, a new offensive philosophy. And he's the guy who I think could do it. I think he would make it work if Garland and Mitchell were here, but I think he can make it work if it was just one of the other two.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think those are all fair points. And you've done a good job selling me on him because I haven't really attached myself to any candidate, but you do a good job with that pitch. Corey, do you have a favorite of this group here?
I feel like I'm stuck in two different bins here because if it's not Borrego, he's probably the only veteran head coach that I really like out of the group. But I also like in the Kenny Atkinson versus the field kind of debate. I feel like I'd rather the Cavs take a swing on an unproven coach because outside of Borrego, I don't really like the resumes of like with Atkinson. I just like I kind of agree with what Chris wrote for Fear the Sword as well and his debrief of Kenny Atkinson's career thus far, where he hasn't really been tasked with a roster that's similar to what the Cavs have now. I mean, he was a part of the KD Kyrie Nets until they both decided they just didn't like him, probably because he was coaching in the same way he was when he wasn't coaching superstars. And this Cavs team, while they're not the KD Kyrie level of egos in the locker room, I still think he is a guy who he kind of feels like a JB equivalent to me where he can help you get to a certain point, but I don't think we've seen him prove that he can take a team to the next level. He's proven he can take a team to the Nets got with the D'Angelo Russell season where they were good enough to outweigh or outplay what they probably should have been with the sum of their parts, but faltered. I really just think even though it isn't what you really want with Donovan Mitchell to take a swing on an assistant coach off of a successful coaching staff, like with Mike Nori or Adelman, that even though it's not the sexiest thing to do, it just is installing a system that is going to work for other teams and just hoping that this coach can carry that success through to the Cavs. So if it's not Borrego, I'd just rather it be a completely fresh face than just recycling the NBA fodder we hear year after year.
One thing that's really interesting, I think, is that all these guys that Tony mentioned are all like have a lot of background in player development. And obviously that's one of the things that coaches come in and they, one of the first things they do is player development. But I think it's interesting that like everyone on the list that's kind of their thing. Like if you look at like Johnny Bryant, it's like this is like the player development guy, and like James Borrego has a strong history with player development. Kenny Atkinson has a strong history with player development, and that kind of tells me that like they're not really happy with the way things have gone with Garland and Mobley, and that's because you would think that a team that won 50 games and then won just under 50 games and got to the second round, you'd be thinking of like, all right, we need like a proven coach that's just going to go out there and like amplify everything and take us to the next level, as opposed to a guy who's more so player development. So not saying it's a wrong move, but I think it's really telling.
Yeah, I agree. And I do want to shift gears here a little bit to flip it and talk about who would be our least favorite of the group, if anyone has any candidates for that. But on the Atkinson point, because he's the first one to me who I agree with Corey, I would rather try something different. But then the more I looked into it, I actually changed my tune a little bit. He's not my favorite of the bunch, but he's an interesting pick because of that strength in player development, which Jackson mentioned is still something the Cavs should be interested in when you have Mobley, Garland, even Okoro, potentially another rookie coming in this year through the draft. And the other thing about Atkinson is that he is an advocate for that free-flowing off-ball movement offense. He's a Warriors protege. There's a quote in that Chris wrote for Fear the Sword, his story on Atkinson, about how Atkinson wants to push his best players harder than anyone else on the roster instead of coddling them. And I think that's something that some of these Cavs guys could benefit from. Thinking of Garland here, especially. Not to say that he's been coddled in the past. I don't know for sure, but it seems like maybe there's some habits that are dying hard. And if they could bring a guy in to really force them out of that, and even like to focus on Evan Mobley, hey, let's throw him into the fire, put him at center. I think Atkinson is a guy who might be more willing to do that than JB was. So I think the team could benefit from both of those things. But I'll start off with my least favorite of the group, and then I'll pass it to you guys. I want to be clear. I'm not saying that I would hate this move by any means. In fact, I don't know enough about this candidate to really say he's my least favorite, but he's just the one that would concern me, and it's Johnny Bryant, just because I know that all I know about him is that he's well regarded, which is a good thing, but he has ties to Donovan Mitchell. And that's where my concern would come, is if the Cavs are doing this simply because they want to appease Mitchell. That would be, and it's something we will talk later in the episode about his influence, but that would concern me a bit because while, yes, they should weigh Mitchell as a factor, getting the best available coach should be the mission. And maybe Bryant is that guy. Maybe he is the best guy for the job. But I'm just worried that if you falter and miss on this decision, I think of the Niang signing as an example of, we want to make Donovan Mitchell happy, so we'll go get his guy. It could work out. It's just something that worries me a little bit. Although, again, I want to be clear, Johnny Bryant could end up being a fantastic coach. He could be a great assistant. I don't know enough about it, but where do you guys land on all this?
I think Bryant is a good thing to bring up. And I've been doing like a little bit of reading about him, and people like around the Knicks really like him, and people kind of were like, well, maybe he could be somebody that the Knicks look at if they moved on from Thibs. Obviously, that's not happening right now. But it does show that he is more than just like Donovan Mitchell's friend. But I do think it's an awkward position to put him in if everyone knows, like if the Cavs were to hire him as the head coach and he's kind of like brought in as like, this is Donovan Mitchell's guy. I think it's really hard to establish buy-in from everybody when they know the same things that we do. So I think that even if Bryant is a good coach, I think it's just it would be a tough position for him.
Yeah, I think anytime that the leading sentence from like a Woj tweet says close with Donovan Mitchell candidate Johnny Bryant, you're immediately thinking that there's just going to be some catering to Mitchell. And then like Jackson's also saying with the players, they're like, either this guy is going to try to go out of his way early to be like, yeah, I'm not just Donovan Mitchell's friend, and be like, I'm going to be harder on him than I am on most. The fact that he's going to be that, like, players are going to closely look at that relationship between the two. And there's always going to be some side eyeing going around. I feel like when that relationship is pre-established, I feel like, as weird as it sounds, I think Kenny Atkinson would be my least favorite, in the sense that I feel like he is the safe pick. And I think the Cavs, if they're going for the safe pick, are just not doing what the purpose of the JB firing was. Keeping JB is the safe move. And by moving off of JB, they officially decided that they didn't really want to play it safe much longer, because you probably would have rinsed and repeated last season to this season. And that's what the safe option is. And if you're trying to shake it up, you're clearly not trying to keep things the way they were before. And Atkinson is just, like I said before, he's like kind of he's been like a name that's been circling for the past offseason since he was removed from the Nets. And if you're just going to go to the next, the safe option being like, well, you know, he's a different voice, but I don't really consider him a floor raiser for this team. It's more, I would expect the same, just in a different style, because obviously he's not the defensive minded coach that JB is, but he's also not the mind that I feel like will take this Cavs to a different level. Borrego is between the two, the one I feel like that's more of a risky, but it makes sense of a swing, because even though Atkinson pushes his players, like, Jackson highlighted this well in his article, that Ball had his best season despite him not having the most opportunities he had in his career under Borrego. And I feel like that type of like hard ass mentality for the coaching would really help, not only for responses from the veterans, but it will be a good kind of shock to the young players like Mobley and Garland, who, even though they've obviously developed over time, it's not like they've really been challenged. I feel like by this staff, you constantly hear JB defend these players, say how they're doing well. Borrego wouldn't be the type of coach to come out and be like, yeah, Garland's just not at the 3-point volume we want. Mobley's not as aggressive as we want him to be. And I feel like Atkinson, even though he does push his players, I feel like would do relatively the same, just because it's an unfamiliar situation for him.
I think that's a really good point to bring up, and that's something that Borrego has been known to kind of rub some people the wrong way, and this is kind of like all basketball teams have a lot of ego, but I think the Cavs in particular are a team with a lot of ego and a lot of, you know, like we've seen at times like Kobe Altman has rubbed people the wrong way, and it seems like it's a situation that could, if it turned ugly, it could turn really ugly, and that's, you know, really not what you want. So I do kind of get those concerns. Like, I don't get the concerns about like not playing young players, or like the defense was bad, because it's like you have Mason Plumlee and Montrezl Harrell as your back line. What do you expect?
Yeah, you guys both made excellent points there. And, you know, let's keep in mind that any of these candidates could join the coaching staff as an assistant. That's something that I've seen floated. I will say, I don't know how much sense it makes for the candidates themselves. I feel like they would almost rather just stay where they are, but it does make a ton of sense for the Cavs to clean house and start fresh, top to bottom with the coaching staff, or at least bring in some new voices. And so I think this is a natural place to transition to a comment from our guy, Brian Windhorst, who said that Donovan Mitchell has the most influence in the NBA this summer. He says Mitchell holds even more influence over the Cavs than LeBron James holds over the Lakers. I think this is an interesting conversation to have, because on one hand, yes, the Cavs absolutely will aim to structure their moves this summer and maximizing Donovan Mitchell. At least that's what I think they should be doing. But Mitchell has never been the type of guy, from what we've seen from reports, he's never been the guy to make demands of his front office. And so I think it's important to keep in mind that, aside from rare cases, I don't think NBA stars want to be in charge of those decisions. It's not their job. There's a reason why someone like Kobe Altman exists. He's the one who's here to build the roster. It's not on Mitchell to make these decisions, and I don't think he wants that responsibility. This was even supported by Windy himself earlier, saying this year that it would probably annoy Mitchell if he felt the Cavs were making decisions solely based on his feelings. And so I'll pose two questions to Corey. How much should the Cavs prioritize building around Mitchell this summer, and how much influence is Mitchell truly going to wield?
I feel like the Cavs have to kind of push this PR out that, yes, Mitchell is the center of this team's universe right now, because we're still in an ongoing situation where the Cavs are trying to retain Donovan Mitchell. And if you go out there and saying like, we're going to build the team independently of Mitchell, in the like kind of hedging your bets, then Mitchell, like, even though Mitchell's not going to publicly go out there and say like, yes, I want the team to do what I deem is fit, if they do a move that upsets him, he can't just act like it's not going to play into the plans down the road. Like, you kind of have to play both sides if you're Mitchell here. And Mitchell, from what I can tell, obviously don't know the guy, we're not close like that, that he's not the type of guy that wants to ruffle feathers with anything he's saying. He's never going to be the one who just kind of stands on the soapbox and says why he's unhappy in a situation. He didn't do it in Utah. He's not going to probably continue that in Cleveland, even though obviously him getting out there and saying these things to pressure the organization, to an organization that's very accustomed to being pressured by their star player to make moves. It would make sense, but I don't think the Cavs need, like, Mitchell is a player that's kind of awkward to build around in the sense because we haven't really determined what kind of roster you need for Mitchell to take a team to the next level. Utah hit a plateau while trying to constantly build around Mitchell, and you really can only make certain amount of moves with Donovan Mitchell. He's a smaller guard. We don't really see that type of template translate in the modern NBA to winning titles, so there's nothing to really go off of. So yeah, it's a very interesting situation for the Cavs and for Mitchell to see how this actually plays out and how much power he actually has.
It's like there's a couple ways you can like decipher what Wendy was saying there. And I think one of the ways is that the Cavs traded their, like, they don't have a first round pick until 2030, and they can't trade a first round pick fully until the 2031 pick unless they make other moves, like to make a first round pick available again. So it's just like, if you gave up that much for one person and they're not under contract for next year or like for the following year after that, they're going to have a lot of power whether they want it or not. So I don't think it's a situation where Mitchell is demanding what should be done or anything like that in a way that LeBron has done, or at least given off the perception that he does. So I don't think it's that big of a deal. I think it's just kind of more of the circumstances surrounding the team, and that's something that, Mitchell can't really control. He wasn't the one who said they should, give up all of your first round picks until 2029 or control of all your first round picks until 2029 for me. So it's just kind of the situation the Cavs put themselves in. And I think if, Mitchell signed a 5-year contract, this becomes a lot different conversation.
Yeah, I think that's an important distinction to make because the way that it was framed, and of course Twitter is its own place, it was framed as if Mitchell is going to be calling the shots, much like we assume we have the perception of LeBron doing that. And I think there is a distinction to make in that the Cavs are absolutely going to approach this summer with the mindset of how do we build around Mitchell, satisfy him, keep him in Cleveland, and maximize whatever championship window we might have. Versus something like Mitchell saying, hey, I'll stay if you do this. Like I don't think he's going to be giving them conditions. It's more so I think he has influence over them because, he's their star player and they want he is their championship window. Whatever it is, it basically relies on him and probably Evan Mobley. And so moving into our final topic today, we have a report from Jake Fisher of Yahoo Sports suggesting that the Cavs don't appear motivated to listen to trade offers for members of their core four. The report says that Kobe Altman is showing a willingness to keep this group together, even in spite of some external pressure to split them up. So I have a couple questions in regard to this, starting with whether or not it would be a good idea to keep the core together. And also, is this kind of just some PR talk for the Cavs to maintain leverage? Or Jackson, do you believe the Cavs are really content with running it back for another season?
I'm going to flip this on you. What do you think, Tony?
I think it's mostly PR talk. I think Kobe Altman genuinely would be okay with running it back, but I think he's checking out all the available options. I don't think he is just, oh, no, we're fine. We're going to run it back next summer, no matter what, or next season, no matter what. I think he's doing this because really, I'll put it this way. I can't see a reason why or how it would benefit the Cavs for Kobe to signal otherwise. If there was a sign that this was a fire sale, then your value just diminishes. If you know that the team is panicking and trying to move off of this core four, it's a lot harder to get the deal that you want. And so to answer your question, I do believe that some of it is PR talk, but I also think that Kobe is telling the truth in that he would be content with running this 4-4 back.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at too, where like I don't think he wants to run this core team back, but I don't think he's going to trade, Jarrett Allen for Kyle Kuzma just to say, hey, we got rid of Jarrett Allen. Well,
It's Kuz time.
Yeah. He would
you
be
see
a
his
power
summer
forward.
league highlights? Those were crazy.
He does always score like 25 points when he plays the Cavs, so maybe there is something about Cleveland. But so like I don't think he's gonna make a move just to make a move, and it's it's really tough with the Jarrett Allen situation because Jarrett Allen is better than what his value has been, and that's something that has always been the case. That's the reason why the Cavs were able to get him for a late Milwaukee Bucks first round pick. And that's why it's really tough to trade him now because it's like you're probably not going to get Jarrett Allen production in a Jarrett Allen trade, and that's the problem.
The Jarrett Allen trade feels more like you're shaking the snow globe type of idea where it's like, I don't like how this team has played in this layout. Let's just switch it up. And it's not like they're going to trade Jarrett Allen for another center. They're going to trade Jarrett Allen for either a 3 or a 4 that at least shakes up the way that the scheme has been going for this Cavs team going forward. I'd like to think that Kobe Altman is like, I feel this is just me personally, no sourcing whatsoever. I've read that I feel like this is a do or die season for Kobe Altman. And if he feels like he wants to hitch himself to the core 4 again for another season, I feel like that is probably unlikely. I feel like it's more likely than not that this team is going to get shaken up. And I feel like it is probably going to be Jarrett Allen that goes, even though there's all this Darius, that whole Darius Garland, his team is pressuring the Cavs with a situation where he's going to leave, because I think they feel like if any of these through 4 are the most replaceable, even though Jarrett Allen is a defensive player of the year candidate, so like at least in the running for the award, that it would probably be Jarrett Allen, just because, especially after what we're seeing with this Dallas team, with how the centers are impacting their lineup so much, that's probably going to be a trend that teams are going to be like, we got to get these rim running bigs that can stretch the floor and they can stay on the floor in a postseason setting. And that, if anything, will probably make Jarrett Allen's value higher than it even is right now, because this is just a copycat league. And if the Mavericks prove successful against the Celtics, not even win the series, but show that a stout defense. Oh, okay. I also said like 2 episodes ago that the Celtics were going to lose.
We were going to forget about that.
I never still think about that every day.
I forgot about it.
Yeah, no,
I remembered.
I think of it every day, but that's just me. Yeah, no, I feel like every NBA GM is also going to listen to every phone call. Like, even though it was kind of framed like, yeah, they're not even like entertaining. It's like Kobe Altman is picking up the phone. He doesn't see the Rockets call and goes like, skip. I don't even want to hear what they have to say. I
mean, if it is the Rockets, I mean, you might as well do that.
The number 3 pick, you don't want Alexander Sarr. I hear he's like is mobile.
I mean,
that's what top tier talent in this draft gets. One attribute, he can move.
They're athletic. Yeah.
Turns out this guy's an athlete. But yeah, if Kobe Altman's hanging up, that's a whole separate kind of problem. So I bet you he's listening, and I feel very confident that there's going to be some kind of shakeup, because I feel like they just can't play it safe.
I will say that if you got the right coach, I think this could be a lot better. And I think that's a lot of where these issues come from, because we've
probably should have done that last year.
Right. Like that's what we've been saying. We've been saying they're like a year behind at every turn. And that's where it's like, where you saw this team ceiling, and you saw where it was bumping into the wall last year with like, hey, like we can't just spam high pick and rolls. And, Garland's not moving off ball. Mitchell's not moving off ball. Like, there are things you can do with a team that has very bad spacing. Like Mitchell and Garland aren't Clay and Steph, but the Golden State Warriors don't have like shooters at every position. That's not
they play 2 non-shooting players all the time. I've been preaching this forever.
Yeah, and I mean they won
not 2 non-shooting bigs, but 2 non-shooting players.
And they've been they won a championship playing that way. Yeah. And that it's I don't want to extend the metaphor too far, but there are ways to create space that aren't like we have to have 5 guys who can shoot. Not everybody's the Boston Celtics, and you don't need to try to be the Boston Celtics. You need to be the best version of yourself, and the Cavs haven't been that on the offensive end. So you could talk me into, if you have the right coach who knows how to organize the offense a lot better, that you can get a better version of this core. But it's just really tough to talk yourself into that after seeing what we've seen the last 2 years.
Yeah, and to that point, I can't remember who tweeted it, but I saw it today, and And they said something along the lines of a lot of people want the team to be worse in order to have a more traditional looking roster rather than just finding a way to make their talent work. Now, I still think there's a case that they could get better if they make a trade. It all just comes down to what the package is. In the past, I've been fully against any of those moves that would be considered lateral. You know, I still kind of stand by not wanting to make a move just for the sake of making a move, but this is like the most pressure you can face before the pipes burst. If the Cavs don't make a move this summer and things don't get better, then this kind of just comes crashing down in a manner that you have no control over at that point, because everyone's going to know that you're trying to move on from Allen, Garland, whatever. Like this core four you're in deep trouble if you stick to it and it doesn't work, or if you even backslide. So I think this is a genuine turning point for the franchise, not to be dramatic, but I think how they approach this summer, it's going to determine a lot of whatever championship window they have. They need to make the right move. The problem is I don't think the right move is as clear as many people think it might be. I think there's a lot of gambling that's going to happen here. You can make a case for many different options. I think you could make a case for keeping the core together and trying to figure a way out to make this work with a different coach. But I also see why you would want to switch it up. And the last thing that I want to say here, look back through recent NBA history and try to find how many times a team has detonated their foundation like this and improved as a result. It's just not something that you see, mainly because it's rare that a team who's kind of close to contending like the Cavs will just dismantle their foundation to begin with. But it's even more rare in those cases that it results in a positive. One example that I can think of is Toronto swinging for Kawhi Leonard, but that's a bold exception. And basically what I'm trying to say is I understand Kobe's cautious approach, because detonating your whole foundation like this, trading two of your key players, it's very, very difficult to actually improve as a result of that.
It's like the Cavs are just a really weird team in a really weird situation. And you could talk me into a lot of things. And I do think that, like, one of the things that you brought up is that, hey, if, you know, you brought it back, then everyone knows that you have to trade Garland. That's fine. It doesn't matter if everyone knows you have to trade a certain player. It's if you have to trade a certain player and there's only the Pelicans who are calling you about it, that's when you know, or like one team like that, that's when there's an issue.
Brandon Ingram mid-range pull-ups. It's going to be Brandon Ingram pull-ups and Kuzma post-ups.
So that's where I'm saying it's like you can keep it going if people want Garland. Like if people talk themselves into Garland, like if Garland shows that he's the 2022 and 2023 version of himself and not the 2024 one, then you can still make a good move. So I do want to push back a little bit against that, but I do get what you're saying where things become a lot more combustible when you're staying status quo. And like if they were to start next season, you know, 5-7 or something like that.
I think back to like even before December of the last season, how close it was to everything just kind of crumbling.
Right. And that's where there can be issues. So I do get that, but that's just kind of why I really wish that the Cavs, you know, moved on from Bickerstaff prior to this previous season.
I feel like this is like probably a separate topic, but the Cavs are on like two teetering like bombs pretty much between Allen and Garland, because it feels like if you had to tell me a year from now the Cavs either stay the same or they regress and they have to move one of the two, I feel like Allen's value is, like Jackson said, not that high, but it also doesn't have its basement value is still, I feel like it's not as far of a drop as what Garland could be if, like, let's say the Cavs don't move him this offseason, where despite struggles this season, all the reporting that's coming out is that Garland still has serious like cachet in the league. And if Garland repeats the performance that we saw this past season again, I feel like the fall in value from this offseason to next offseason is a sharp drop. And then you're going to be stuck with the situation where it feels like you're just offloading his contract, because it is a pretty, especially with these aprons. I mean, teams are going to be much more hesitant to take that swing on Garland's contract than an affordable Allen contract, where you kind of know what he's going to bring to the table, because you just like it. The reason I feel like the Cavs would trade Allen is more because he's just more movable than Garland, not necessarily in that situation because he's less talented. So it just feels like Kobe's kind of like playing with fire if he doesn't move one.
the most important thing I think an organization can do is evaluate, like know what you have on the roster and understand their value. And I think that's something that I feel like the Cavs have sort of struggled with in terms of like they didn't know how to counteract the issues that they were going to run into, and they didn't like you look at like it's really easy to point to like Hartenstein and Lowry, Markkanen playing really good once they leave, but it's like did the Cavs know that they were this caliber of player when they sent them out or not? And that's where I think if you're going to call in the question this front office, I think that's where you're going to have to do it.
Yeah. And I have one more bonus question to get to, but I do want to circle back real quick to something Corey was saying, because I just thought of this. Darius, this season definitely tanked some of his value, but it sounds like it's still very, very high. The concern is if he has another season like this, it might really tank. And I think of someone like Jordan Poole as an example of that, where he has that season with Golden State, and you can make a lot of excuses for why he played so poorly, and he still had some trade value. Now, Jordan Poole is like one of the worst contracts in the league. No one wants to touch that. With
him and Sharif Cooper look like they're going to be buddies.
I'm not saying that Darius is anywhere near that. I'm just saying it's crazy how quickly things can change. And so that's a potential downfall of sticking with Darius. Now, I'm in the camp of I want to keep Darius if you can. So take that with a grain of salt.
I mean, I feel like I've been skeptical of Garland throughout this whole season, and that is just a wild comparison that you threw out there.
I just want to be clear. I'm not comparing the two. I'm just talking about the way value can change.
You literally did compare the two, but that's fine.
I see the narrative to what he's saying, though, because it wasn't like when Golden State gave Poole that contract, like with Darius, you didn't second guess it whatsoever. Poole looked like he fit into his role. And then when he got traded to Washington, it felt like it was more they had to decide between Draymond and keeping the core together or moving Poole. It wasn't even like Poole sucks, we got to move off of Poole. The Wizards didn't realize what they were absorbing, and they're like, wow, when Poole's not surrounded by generational talent, it turns out this dude looks pretty suboptimal for a team that is gonna be like, hey, take the keys, Jordan, and see what you got. And it turns out Jordan wants to drive by himself quite frequently.
I mean, to be fair, the Wizards are like the worst run basketball team ever.
Yeah.
And there's never a player in the league, I feel like, that needs more structure in an organization than Jordan Poole. The dude oozes confidence.
But I think, to go back to like the comparison that Tony made that he's saying he didn't make.
I was just saying one bad year you can excuse. You can't get fooled twice. Okay, so if it happens the second time, it would be a lot more difficult to trade Darius. Again, I think Darius is very good, and I think he's going to bounce back.
I think that's kind of where you have to get to. Are Darius's problems because he's not a good basketball player, or are his problems because he's not fitting well with Donovan Mitchell? And I think that's where you have to make a determination, because if it's, Garland's not that good of a player, then obviously you have to trade him. But if you think it's because Garland doesn't fit with Mitchell but is a very good player, I think you can still hold on to him, because that's still going to shine through, even if like 3 + 3 is equaling 5 and not 6 with the Mitchell and Garland pairing. You're at least going to see that, Garland is worth something.
Can it be possible that two things can be true, though, where we know that Garland's a player, but he can't just be being the Batman to someone or Robin to someone's Batman, like with the Mitchell situation? Because we saw Garland play well independently on his own, and then it felt like in the first season we were seeing steps to where we wouldn't really leave that season being like Garland can't be the second fiddle to Mitchell, and then we see this season, like, I feel like saying that Garland's determining how talented he is as a player correlates to playing alongside Mitchell. I feel like both things can be true. It just is an awkward fit, but a talented player. It's more mentality than skill thing.
I think that's where they're looking at all these player development coaches really speaks to like how they view Garland and Mobley, how they view whether or not they've hit their ceiling, because it's like if they had hit their ceiling, you're not looking for player development guys.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think this ties back into kind of what I was saying with the difficulty of making a trade now, is that what you have in Darius and Donovan. You know that it's a very, very skilled and talented backcourt. the fit has been a bit awkward, but I think there's enough reason there to believe you can make it work under the right circumstances. And so do you put all your chips into trying to get the most out of that, or do you take a chance on something else? Now, speaking of taking a chance, and this is my bonus question I want to hit on really, really quick because it's something that was floated out there, and I know Jackson has strong feelings on it. A certain Paul George has been linked in some hypothetical Cavs trades. Now, let's get this part out of the way first. It would have to be a sign-and trade. It makes things much more complicated for everyone involved, but all things being possible, Jackson, what do you make of the PG-13 speculation?
It's stupid. Like, I know that people don't like Brandon Ingram, but Brandon Ingram is better than I think people think he is. And I also think that while Paul George is better than Brandon Ingram in 2024, you can't make a trade that sends away like Garland and Allen and get a 34-year-old unless that 34-year-old is going to significantly raise his team ceiling to the point where they're going to be a championship level team. And I don't think you think
he would.
Okay,
we disagree slightly on this.
But this is
I don't think it's possible. I don't think the trade will happen. And I wouldn't sign a petition for it. But if it happened, I would talk myself into it pretty easily because I think he's probably one of the best 3-and-D.
You can talk yourself into Kyle Kuzma.
Still. No, I couldn't.
Yes, you could.
I'm not a big fan of Kuzma or Ingram on the trade market.
I think so. Like the problem is, you're gonna have to, if you were to get Paul George, you're gonna have to operate tighter into that like 3-star model where all 3 of your stars have to really fit, and you're gonna have to pull in like guys that really fit around them. So if you were to do that, you're looking at like, you know, Isaac Okoro needs to take a huge step forward. Yeah. You know, like you have Max Strus, you have, you know, like it's really tough to make that type of system work in today's NBA unless you have megastars. And Paul George is not a megastar in 2024. Donovan Mitchell isn't. And I don't know if their games fit well enough together where you could actually talk yourself into it. Like you're not, this isn't, like people forget how good Kevin Love was and how good Kyrie Irving and LeBron, well, people don't forget how good Kyrie and LeBron were, but like they were immensely talented players. And I don't know if, like, it's just really tough to get this model to work. And it's a lot easier to be the Phoenix Suns than it is to be, you know, who I think Devin Booker is better than anybody who would be on the Cavs. Like, it's easier.
You could argue Donovan.
But, like, okay, so if you were to power rank George, KD, Donovan, and Booker,
well, their problem was the Beal trade, in my opinion. First off, I think they gave up a little too much for Durant, and then they said, "Screw it, we're gonna take it to the next level and go for Beal for some reason." A Mobley, Mitchell, Paul George trio, I think, is pretty dang good. There's obviously setbacks, health concerns, the age. Like, listen, you would be taking a big swing and a huge risk. But if you're going to trade Garland and Allen for anybody, I could talk myself into PG being the guy, but I probably wouldn't make that decision.
You don't have your draft pick until 2030. What is Paul George going to look like in 2030? Well, probably not.
I couldn't tell you.
I mean, you
maybe
probably don't want to know.
Is just signed to JJ Redick's network.
Yeah, well, JJ Redick, who knows?
Listen, I think in theory, like if you're trying to maximize the championship window, I could talk myself into it. I want to be so clear. I'm not signing up for it, not advocating for it. I'm just saying I would be able to talk myself into it. I know that you are very much against it. And I understand why.
Like if it was like, hey, you're trading them for LeBron James, who is still a top 10 to top 5 level player. Issues.
You're really punching on everything.
LeBron James is
1 year, basically.
LeBron James is better than Paul George. You could talk me into LeBron James being better than Paul George in 2030.
Right now? Okay.
Yeah, like right now.
LeBron
like right now. Yeah, but like LeBron is like
he's gonna be pushing 50, man.
Yeah, but like I'm just saying, if
Bryce is gonna be in the league,
if they both wanted to play in 2030, I would put a lot of money on LeBron James being better than Paul George, and like that's like a ridiculous thing to say.
This one, so.
Well, check this out. If they're both playing in 2030, we would definitely be able to prove this one.
I guess so. Yeah.
I don't think we care, but it's just like so like if you were to get somebody like LeBron, who I think would make this a championship level team, I think then it's like, hey, let's do that because, this team currently has a long runway, but I don't know if they have a championship runway. If you get Paul George, I don't think this team has a championship runway, and it definitely doesn't have a long runway anymore. So that's where I think all of your issues are going to be coming from. And it's just like, yeah, you could talk yourself into it, and I think you would have a fun next 2 seasons, but I don't know what that looks like afterwards.
I think it'd be pretty ironic if the Cavs were like, we've had some pretty injury-riddled seasons the past 2 years. Why don't we just go for one of the players who is injured more often than not, and Paul George, who might not be out for like long stretches, but the guy takes like weeks off due to like random sprains or anything. And then you put all your chips in, and then you have a skeleton crew of a roster because you moved everything in. And then it becomes, wow, Mobley and Mitchell for 60 plus games, but then you get a few guest appearances by Paul George, cross your fingers for postseason time. And then that contract runs out, and then you're like, wow, and now we're stuck with a terrible contract.
Tony, if we're talking about,
I will say he has been healthy in the playoffs recently, though. I will say he misses a lot of games, but he has played in the playoffs recently. The health is a concern, though. I'm not denying
that. Brandon Ingram health is much more of a concern, honestly. He's playing like 50 games a year.
I'm not even going to advocate for any trades. I'm really not sold on any of it. But I think Paul George does give you a championship window. It's all I'm arguing. If they made that deal, I would say, hey, they got 2-3 years where you have maximized your chance. But again, I'm okay with keeping this together.
I have another dumb hypothetical. Would you do that trade for KD?
Yeah. Same thought process. Would you rather do maximizing your 2-3 years? It's basically the Toronto thing with it a little bit more of a leeway because you don't have to worry about Kawhi / Paul George leaving immediately after. You know that you have him. You just have to hope that he's healthy and you manage to make a run at it, which Toronto got really lucky in a lot of ways, but that's kind of the blueprint that I'm using.
I think kind of the difference between that blueprint or like what you're envisioning is that the pieces around the core guys, like in Toronto, really made sense, and I don't think they make sense the same way in Cleveland.
Well, it would also depend on how you manage. If you manage to restructure the roster around, now you're asking a lot to retool the rest of the roster. Like, what if you got Norman Powell in return in that deal as well? Would that help? The little things around the margins that you could do. Again, it's not going to happen. This was the main thing that I wanted to say is Paul George. Right. I'm saying it right now. There's no sense in even doing the 10-minute hypothetical we just had because he is not coming to Cleveland. I don't think it's going to happen. That's the main reason why I think we should stop talking about it.
Who has a better chance, personally? LeBron or Paul George?
LeBron.
Okay.
Which I think is all the same issues, but even a smaller championship window. But I'm not going to complain about.
But the championship window is like wider. Open. It's like a door. It's like a runway. You have to go through all these fraudulent teams in the East,
In Jackson's mind, it's the security guard meme where they don't even pat down. They just let you
basically
through.
That's, like LeBron hasn't lost a meaningful game in Boston since like 2008.
Well, that's all for this.
He did lose that. He did lose that one game where he was crying afterwards, which was pretty great.
Yeah.
So I do want to bring that up.
Yeah. That's all for this week's recap. Special thank you to everyone who listened or watched on YouTube. If you enjoyed our show, please consider hitting subscribe and dropping a like to help out the channel. Let us know in the comments what you think of a potential Paul George trade, or just share your thoughts on anything we discussed today. And with all that being said, go Cavs.
I agree. Go Cavs. Brian, what did you think of the Acolyte?